Okay.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for coming along to tonight's EAP meeting. Have we got any apologies for absence? I don't think there's any recorded. No, none, thank you. And the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of September 2022.
Unfortunately, Chair, they're not available yet, so I'll have to bring the minutes of this meeting and last meeting to the next for formal approval. Apologies for that.
No problems with that, Ben. Thank you very much. And are there any declarations of interest? Okay, that's none. So we move on to item 4, which is the proposed amalgamation of Tennyson Road Infant School and Alfred Street Junior School. I'd like to welcome Joe Hutchinson, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll work my way through the paper and summarise what's in there, because it is a very, very long paper, and I'll explain exactly why that is as we work our way through. But the purpose of the report this evening is to inform this Education, Skills and Employment panel of the outcomes of the statutory period of formal consultation approved by the Executive on Thursday the 25th of August, and to seek its views on the proposed amalgamation for Tennyson Road Infant School and Alfred Street Junior School, as requested by the respective governing bodies. You may recall that the outcomes of an initial consultation were provided in a report for consideration by Executive on the 25th of August 2022. Excuse me. This demonstrated majority support for the amalgamation of the schools. This resulted in the Executive approving the publication of a statutory notice in accordance with the provisions of various elements of the Education Act, and of course with DfE guidance. And within this statutory notice was the recommendation that to progress the amalgamation process, Tennyson Road Infant School was to be technically closed, and the age range of Alfred Street Junior School to be expanded. And one thing that I feel it's important to mention this evening is the recommended closure of Tennyson Road Infant School does not in any way prejudice the site, the name, the staffing, or any other aspect of the amalgamated school, which can be the subject of further consultation and decision making as the process continues. So this report today aims to provide a summary of the outcomes of the formal consultation, and this was undertaken between the 5th of September and 2nd of October 2022 as approved by Executive. And having regard to the formal consultation outcomes, the Executive will make a decision as to whether or not to amalgamate the schools. So one of the recommendations in the report is to progress the amalgamation of the schools in accordance with legislative requirements and Department for Education statutory guidance. In this report, it's really important to consider the statutory guidance, and there are certain recommendations that decision makers have to consider in this statutory process. Decision makers have to be assured that the consultation was appropriately and fairly and openly carried out. So the whole of section 4 gives you an overview of how the formal consultation was presented, where it was distributed, and how stakeholders, a variety of stakeholders, were notified. In section 5, the consultation responses are deliberately broken down into an overall response, which you can see in section 5, and then broken down into particular themes, or the themes that came through in the consultation. The themes are noted in section 6, and this is because the statutory guidance is very clear and states that not just the numbers, but the responses should be considered by decision makers in this process. The greatest weight should be given to the responses of those stakeholders who have completed the consultation. So it's not just about the figures, it's about the actual themes of the responses and the comments made. And in section 6, you will see that there is a breakdown of the common themes emerging from the consultation responses. Further to that, the statutory guidance is very clear that decision makers need to give the focus also, and in particular, to the responses of parents, children and staff at the schools. So section 7 in this report aims to go into greater detail with regard to the common themes emerging from that particular group of stakeholders. And then finally, just drawing you through to the proposals and next steps. The executive advisory panel here today is invited as a result of this report to consider the outcome of the formal consultation. And this paper has progressed quite quickly from the closing date of the consultation, because the statutory guidance does state that there needs to be a decision made within a period of 2 months at the end of the formal consultation period. So that gives us until the 2nd of December, hence the need for the paper to come to EAP today. So I do feel that the report does give very clear data in a variety of forms as to the outcomes of the consultation, but I felt it was important just to make everybody aware of what the statutory guidance asks when a decision is being considered.
Thank you very much for that, Jo. And I think this is something that has come back quite a few times due to various different consultations and things for approval and things. It's a very comprehensive report, and thank you very much for getting that round in such a very quick, timely manner as well. I mean, these things are very difficult at the best of times. So thank you very much for that. Are there any questions or comments? I've got Philip.
Okay, you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, good. Yeah, I've got a few questions. I have to say, I found this very, very confusing when I received this. It took me a considerable amount of time to get my head around it, to be honest, because it says in some places it's just a technical decision about because you have to name one particular place as being the one that you're going to go to, but there's no prejudgment, and I get that. But then when the actual questions are shared, the online questionnaire is shared, and it says on that, resulting in the formal closure of Tennyson Road Infant School. So is that what the respondents saw? Did they see the phrase, this will result in the formal closure of Tennyson Road Infant School? Is that the basis on which they answered the questionnaire?
Jo, I'll pass that back to you.
Yes, that was the question in the consultation.
I'm sorry, can I follow up with your permission, Chair? Then I'm very confused, because it said about not prejudging anything, but if the respondents were given this, then they responded on that basis. So, Jo, you mentioned earlier that this consultation had to be appropriately and fairly carried out. That doesn't seem appropriate or fair to me, to say that this particular school will be closed when in fact it's a legal fiction. Can you clarify that, please?
Can I just also, Philip, just make it clear that actually we're not closing physically a school. It is just the name that is closing.
It says, and expanding the age range of Alfred Street Junior School. It
Absolutely.
Says
so it's expanding the name of the school, but we're not closing a physical building. Okay,
I'm happy to accept that, but the proposal in the questionnaire doesn't say that. The proposals would lead any reasonable person would assume, right, they're planning to close Tennyson Road, expand Alfred Street, and they want my opinion on that. Whereas in fact, we're being told that this is a legal fiction. So this doesn't seem to me a very well well-worded question, and in fact has probably misled respondents.
Can I respond, Chair? Is that okay?
You can, Neil. Yes. Yeah.
So thank you, Councillor Owen, for your comments. I have to say, I think we've been extremely clear at every stage of this process. Those words, this does not prejudge site, this does not prejudge any elements of this. This is about a technical closure of one school, the loss of a DFE number and the expansion of a new school across 2 sites, depending on governor decisions. And I think we've reiterated that time and time again. Well, certainly at this meeting last time we had this conversation, it was in the consultation paper which went through the consultation team to make sure it was as clear as possible. So I really think we've made every effort to be clear throughout. This is not a consultation, never has been about sites. It's simply about school organisation. Now, if you think the recommendation isn't worded clear enough to reflect that, then I'm happy to take your recommendations on how we change it, and that's great. But I don't think that implies that the consultation itself was flawed, because we checked very carefully with consultation colleagues that we'd been clear enough that what the consultation was about, and it's not about site, never has been, and that's a separate piece of work to be done. But like I say, if you think the recommendation is not clear enough on that, and you have to remember we have to meet the statutory requirements, which is Tennyson Road School will close as a DFE number and disappear, and Alfred Street will then.
But you don't say that. You don't say that.
Well, if you'd like to suggest an alternative wording for the recommendation, yeah, that's absolutely fine. Like I say, I think we've taken that from the statutory expectation that the school will close in a school organisation terms.
Okay, if I could carry on, please, Chair. Okay, well, to answer that, how could it? Well, let me read verbatim what it says. This is what respondents will have seen. So parents, other stakeholders of the school will have read this. The next phase of consultation seeks your views on the proposal to amalgamate Tennyson Road Infant School and Alfred Street Junior School, resulting in the formal closure of the DFE number of Tennyson Road Infant School and expanding the age range of Alfred Street Junior School. This couldn't be clearer to me. So I am stunned that this is regarded as an acceptable means of seeking people's opinions. To be honest, it looks to me like it has been totally prejudged. But I hope I'm wrong. But I do think that this question, the way it has been put, it needed to be made absolutely clear to parents and others that this is not about necessarily expanding the age range of Alfred Street Junior School. That was not made clear. And therefore, I believe that this consultation is severely flawed.
Okay, my response to that, Councillor, is if you look at the supporting information that went out with the questions, I think it's entirely clear what the question was. And in the question you spoke, it says closing the DFE number, which refers to the information.
It doesn't.
That's what Councillor just read there.
I accept that it says that, but it then goes on to say expanding the age range of Alfred Street Junior School. What else does that mean other than the kids at Tennyson go to Alfred Street? That is, you may have provided other information, but when someone does an online questionnaire, they don't look at everything. They look at the introduction and then they answer the questions, and that introduction has misled them. I'm sorry.
Okay, I have to disagree. I think we have done what we can, and the expansion of the age range of Alfred Street is what's going to happen, and Alfred Street will operate over 2 sites, as was very clearly said in the supporting information. So that's my view on it. I totally respect you can have a different view, Councillor Owen.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Well, I'm sorry to say, actually, I agree with Philip, because I think the questionnaire wasn't really clear. I read through it and I thought to myself, it sounds as if you've actually closed Tennyson Road and everybody's going to Alfred Street. That's how it comes across, which in fact, if it's a consultation, you shouldn't have been doing anything. But I've had a phone call today from a councillor asking why Rushden and Hime town councils and the ward member have not been consulted about this questionnaire at all.
Dorothy, And I will answer that. So all councillors are aware of consultations that are happening within the council. So if you are a ward member for that area, and in fact, if you look at the replies, there are seven NNC councillors that have replied to that. So I would suspect the 6 from Rushton are part of that 7.
Well, I have to say I'm not the ward member over here now. I used to be, but I'm not now. I'm over at Earthenborough and 5 villages. But I think this phone call today was from ward member who clearly, so on page 21, it says the requirements, NNC ward councillors for the area, Rushton and Hyam town councils. And this ward member would not have phoned me up, tell me that she had been consulted or the rest of them if they hadn't. So I'm sorry to say on this occasion, I think that, seriously, I've got to believe them. I think that if they've
Dorothy, yeah. So you're actually telling me that a ward member for Rushton was not involved with the consultation of this, knowing full well how many times this has come back to this committee, has been going on for numerous years, that they were not aware of the consultation.
Well, that's what I'm just saying. I'm only passing over what this person phoned me up about today. And no doubt she's listening to this conversation, so she'll be aware that I've actually brought it up. The other questions I'd like to bring up is that, you see, I'll be honest, I saw it that you'd shut down Tennyson Road and you'd kept over Alfred Street, whereas in name only, what you're actually doing is passing over the name to Tennyson Road to make it Alfred Street. But the question I've got to say, the way I saw it was, what happens if you put disabled children, this is children in wheelchairs, into Alfred Street? What aspect do they have of the education there? That's my question.
Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. Sorry, Joe, and I'm speaking over. I'll pick that one as well. As part of the merger process, the council have, or within the Children's Service Capital Programme, we have allocated resource to ensure that the schools are fit for the purpose to which they become after any merger happens. And so if there are any access issues, that would be picked up through that route.
And can I then ask, how much money is there then set aside for structural changes?
I apologize, I don't know. I can let you know. I don't know at the top of my head. I know it was part of the conversation around the Children's Services Capital Programme, but it is a commitment we made to the governors of both schools through the process. Right.
So the next question I've got to ask, one of the, you actually put about the reasons for these schools closing is because of falling roles. Now, this wasn't the school's fault at all. This is the county council. Before your time, this is the county council who stopped recruitment of both these schools, which then led to a fall in numbers, which is really sad, actually, that this happened. It did, and I think that needs to be put so that people understand that some of this has happened due to the previous council, not that it was happening, but the fact was it was forced to happen.
I think, Dorothy, with that, I think people will realise that. I mean, this has been going on for numerous years, well before this council was started.
Right. So the next question is, if you look at Alfred Street, one of the things you don't actually say, but where are the staff supposed to park? Now, you have a car park next door to this school, but it is a residential car park. It's free parking for the residents to use the town centre. So whereabouts are these staff going to park down there? I mean, there's a road outside Wilco's, which is for the taxi drivers, perhaps half a dozen parking spaces for residents to go to the shops. But exactly, you haven't explained where the staff are going to park down here if this is a school which is chosen.
I'm going to say thank you, Councillor Maxwell, for your question. I'm going to say it again. This is not about site. The schools will continue to operate on 2 sites. The staff at Alfred Street will continue to turn up at Alfred Street. The staff at Johnson Road.
No, but this is not this year. You're talking about next year. When you come to close one of these schools,
No,
Dorothy, we are not closing the school.
you're not closing Alfred Street,
It's just the name that will be closed.
right?
So the physical buildings will still be there in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time,
So you're
operating
saying,
as schools.
so are you saying then years 1 to 6 will be in one school? Is that, am I correct in thinking that?
No,
No. So it will remain as it is, but just be called something different.
So you're not going to, so I understood, so I got this wrong then. I understood that years, so you'd have a nursery, but then you'd have reception, and reception up to year 6 were in one building. No, they're not.
No.
No, they're going to be in 2 buildings.
yes, they currently are.
And so Rowan Gate, which you haven't mentioned, how does this fit into
Well,
setup?
that's because, Dorothy, Rowan Gate is not part of this consultation.
Right, so it's not mentioned.
Well, it's Tennyson Road and Alfred Street.
Okay. So I've obviously got this wrong. I now understand what you're trying to say is that you have one name, 2 buildings.
Correct.
Right, okay. However, what I would like to know is how you, if you're going to make these what I would describe as outstanding schools, because that's what we're aiming to do, how do you actually aim to make sure that this actually happens?
Okay, I think it's not really a question regarding the consultation. I mean, happy to come back to you on it, but we are supposed to be just talking about this consultation and this report tonight.
Right, well, going back to the consultation then, can I just ask if it's possible? So I've obviously got this wrong. Could I just ask that you've got until December I think it was December the 2nd, is it? When you actually got to put this last lot of consultation. Is it possible then that both Howard and Rushden, if they're telling me they haven't got it, is it possible to send them not only the questionnaire, but can you send them the results of the questionnaire that you've actually sent us so that they can actually see what the residents have actually said about this? Because I think that would help them.
So all members are entitled to have the executive pack. And this goes to executive in 2 weeks' time. In fact, I think it's released in 2 weeks' time. So they will all have a copy of this consultation.
But is it possible to send it to the clerk of each council so she can then download it and give it to them?
Well,
Before that?
if the ward members want to send it on to the parish council, then yes, they can. I suspect that some of those members sit on the parish council.
That's right, they do actually. So therefore, no, they're on town council. We're not parishes.
Town parish council. Yes. So by all means, they can give them a copy of this report.
Would they be sent it? That's what I'm asking, because we actually got this.
Every member of NNC gets a copy of the executive report if they so wish.
Yeah, and the ones and so the councillors which are not on, so what I want to do is where the councillors are not on NNC, they are just the ward members of Higham and Rushden, could we ensure that they get access to both the copy of the report and what the report actually says? Is that possible?
Can I just say, Councillor Maxwell, where local councils, towns and parishes are not, the matter is not for them, we will not routinely send them papers and reports. Where, for instance, where they've got a statutory role in terms of planning applications, they do receive those reports, but not for purely NNC matters.
Right. I just think, this is my view, I'm only sort of thinking outside the box here. I just think what Philip said in a way, I think the questionnaire, I did look through it, and some bit of it was misleading. And I just feel that the ward members of both these town councils feel a little bit ejected. You know, this is a school in their area and they want to know what's going to happen to it. So if we could just assume that they will get something, that would be great. Lastly, I'd like to know is, what are you doing about Wi-Fi for Alfred Street School? Because at the moment, it's a hit and miss situation.
Okay, again, that's not part of the consultation, Dorothy.
No, I realise that.
Happy to come back to you about that, because if I'm honest, I don't know what's happening about the Wi-Fi, but we'll come back to you on that, Dorothy. Okay. Anne-Marie, have you got your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to come in to help Councillor Maxwell, hopefully. I say that with my fingers crossed a little bit, Councillor Maxwell. I think in terms of misunderstanding, I can understand, because I know Councillor Edwards and I have had a number of conversations about this, I can understand how this has been misleading. But if I can just take us back, I think just for the sake of simplicity, we have understood as officers from the point at which I came in here that the challenges in both Tennyson Road and Alfred Street, independently, both schools have their own challenges, some of them financial, some around the performance and the delivery of those schools, which we haven't gone into in detail because that's a matter for the governing bodies of each of the schools. What we have done as a local authority or as council officers here is we've tried to intervene to address both issues of financial sustainability and issues of practice. What we needed to do was intervene early, one might argue not early enough, but we wanted to intervene early to safeguard these two schools as maintained schools by the local authority. Because had we failed to act, or had we failed to be acknowledging the challenges that both schools, independently of each other, were in, both financially and in terms of performance, then there was a very real risk that the DFE would have intervened and would have looked to academise either or both of these schools. And it was very clear to me from the executive and from the broader councillors that it's not the desire of this council to academise their schools.
Very good.
So, in order to make sure that our path through this was firstly transparent, so that councillors and exec could see what we were doing, but also to make sure that we have got a matter of public record for the Department for Education that we are going through this incrementally in stages. Right. Now, the first stage to sustainability, which we want on public record, is to ensure that we're appropriately adhering to the DFE guidance on what needs to happen if we amalgamate schools. And the first and most overt challenge, if you like, was the financial challenge, because of the fall in roll, which you've recognised. The schools, neither school were going to be financially sustainable.
That's right.
And if we lost one school through financial sustainability reasons, the likelihood is we would also lose the other schools.
The other school as well.
Which would have meant rushed and entirely lost infant and junior education. So the first stage in ensuring that we didn't mix up the issues was to look at creating a single school. That enables not our decision, not a local authority decision, not a member decision, not an officer decision, but the decision of the governing body then is how they then make the financial savings for the two different buildings to ensure that we have financial sustainability. This consultation brings us to that position. So we've gone through the entire journey in the public domain, and I can understand, because of the number of issues that we've got, and also the keen interest that local residents, local members, previous county councillors, parish councillors have at the sites of both of these schools. It's easy to read into, and perhaps the learning for myself and Neil and Joe is that we could have more clearly articulated what this meant.
Yeah,
the first stage of the amalgamation of the schools, we've got the support to amalgamate the schools. Now that we've got that, what we do is we close a unique school identifier. And forgive me if you've already gone through this today, and it was I couldn't hear the meeting. Now, the next stage is for the new or the shadow governing body of these schools to determine how they work with us to improve the performance of the school, but also to achieve financial sustainability. If I was a betting woman, I would suggest that some of those back office functions are looked at and addressed to see where we can make savings. There may also be options that if they have got available space that's underutilised, then they might want to look to see who might want to rent that space. That will be a matter for the governing body, and I'm sure we will keep this as transparent as we can, and where it should be a member decision or an exec decision, we'll ensure that this group as a first are taken along on the journey, if you like, to make sure that what we're not doing is creating more confusion.
Go on, sorry.
No, and so, you know, the early conversations about which building would it be, we knew that was going to be controversial, and that was never the decision at that stage. If we get to a position where the governing body says, look, we need to get rid of one of these sites, then that will be the thing that we consult on at that time. But we're not consulting on all of these issues at the same time. It's incrementally done so as not to cause confusion, but clearly the incremental approach has caused more confusion than if we just rolled it all in together and had one big conversation about what do we want, which is what we try to avoid. So we might have got it wrong, or we might have got it right. Time will tell.
I think it was just the wording. The wording in the consultation was just slightly a bit misleading, as Philip's just said. One thing I would like to ask, because I know at Tennyson Road, will years 1 and 2 be separated, because they do not have separate teachers for each class?
Now, Dorothy, you know as well as I do, that'll be a matter for the governing body. And I'd love to tell everybody how to run their own business, but I'm not allowed.
Okay.
So we will offer whatever support we possibly can to that governing body to make sure that our children get the best possible outcomes and best possible experiences from their time in that school. And we will advise that they do everything that they can to manage their budget and to deliver the best education for our children. And we will try not to intervene where we don't need to.
And I think equally, there are savings, because you don't need, if you've got one school, you've got two buildings, one school, you don't need 2 offices, you know.
Councillor Maxwell, we can't tell them.
No, I know you can't. I'm just saying. Okay.
And likewise, I can't tell you what to do. So if you want to have your own conversation, you fill your boots. But at this stage, it's a matter for the governing body.
I understand.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm
Thank you both. Thank you both.
Got clarity.
Perfect. I do have some others. So I have Wendy next, please.
Chair. But just really very quickly, it was good to read the responses to the consultation, that the majority of those are fully supportive of the amalgamation of the 2 schools, and that includes the parents, carers and staff of both schools, who can see that the amalgamation could see an improvement in the education provision for all children at that school, or schools. We're talking of one school, but I know we're talking of both sites, so I don't want to confuse that. So it is good to see that the majority of those responses are fully in support of the amalgamation.
Thank you, Wendy. Lee.
Thank you, Chairman. So my comments fall into 2 parts, really. Firstly, I can understand because I was affected too. I can understand where there was some confusion. I wouldn't agree that anything was misleading, because I don't think that was the case, but it was certainly unclear, and I think some of the questions were ambiguous. And I think that is why we got responses. A third of people that responded said, well, they thought we should retain the Tennyson Road site. Well, clearly that was never one of the options. More than a third of people commented that they were worried about children having to go to the Alfred Street site and the traffic. The reason they were saying that is because your average person in the street, and we are all guilty of doing this in our sectors, the average person in the street is not as technically minded on certain subjects as we are as people on this call are. And we're all guilty of doing that in the sectors that we're in. So I think the public probably just didn't understand. And I don't blame them. I was one of the members of the public that didn't. I also got quite a few phone calls. They didn't understand that it was a technical closure of a name of a school, of a registered school, but the sites would be retained. That's the first part. The second part is I don't think any of that, as it happens, makes any difference to what we're discussing today, because of course what we're discussing is, should there be an amalgamation of the schools? We all would accept that there has to be, for them to be sustainable and the schools to continue. And of course, the vast majority, by an enormous percentage, the vast majority of respondents also say that they understand and accept there should be an amalgamation. So as far as the recommendation really from this EAP, the proposals are, then there are three parts to it. Of course, we want to support children and young people, and everybody would understand we're doing that. Of course, we would support that there needs to be an amalgamation, and all of the respondents, or the vast majority of respondents, would accept that. And we want to make sure that it's viable moving forwards. So I think whilst it was unclear, and in hindsight, we would accept that we have to be careful when some people are experts in this, that we have to understand that not everybody's an expert. So we word things very carefully. I don't think it makes any difference to this particular recommendation, because we are talking about something that everybody agrees with, which is the amalgamation.
Thank you, Lee. Philip.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd just like to say to Neil, we were clearly talking at cross purposes for a very long time there. So I've now counted 4 different councillors who all thought that this was that there was going to be a decision on a single site at some point. So I do accept what Anne-Marie said, that the consultation could have been clearer. I would also just mention page 14, item 7.2.6. One respondent voiced concern about what would happen to the closed site. Why was this not picked up with a footnote? By the way, there is no closed site. And page 13, over half of respondents spoke about the economies of scale of operating a single school site. Again, I think maybe for the distribution of this data, maybe it should have been emphasised that these people obviously didn't understand, as well as us councillors who have all been rather dim and didn't understand. Obviously, as Councillor Wilkes has said, we will agree to this. I think we've already agreed in principle to this anyway at a previous meeting. But how about a further recommendation? And that is that someone let the parents know that it's not going to be on a single site unless at a later stage the government decide to do that. Because if we didn't know and the respondents didn't know, then it's pretty clear that the parent body as a whole is currently under the impression that there is going to be a single site. So could I recommend that we do that, Chairman?
Thank you, Philip. I'm just going to go to Anne-Marie, please.
Councillor Owen, I think this is a complicated one. I think when we started having this conversation, there was a very real risk that one or other of the sites may have to close, which is why we wanted to go through that consultation really slowly, as I said, and do it really incrementally. So the first stage of this journey would be the amalgamation in the eyes of the DFE, and that was going to safeguard the budget in the immediate, and it was also going to safeguard one or other or both of the schools becoming academies, because we hadn't been seen to act and we hadn't taken appropriate action. So we were doing this incrementally, was always going to get us to a position where we safeguarded the maintained status of these schools, which was important, as is the sustainability of the schools over the longer term. When we started that process, and probably when we started having these conversations, which I think now is probably 12 months ago, there was a very real risk at that stage that we may still get to a position where physically one or other of the sites might need to be closed down. We don't believe that that will be the case today. And what we wanted to do, again, which is why we needed to go through this process incrementally, was to ensure and to safeguard the longevity of both of those sites, if that was the best for children, if that was the best for the finances of the council. So it's not to say that the design of this was intentionally misleading or intentionally difficult. There was a very real risk 12 months ago, once we started to go through this process, that at some point one or other of those sites might need to close. We believe in the work that's gone on over this last period, the likelihood of one or other of those sites actually physically being closed down as a school is probably highly unlikely to happen, because there are greater demands on our school estate today than there was 12 months ago, for sure. So I think recognition that, firstly, this is the second consultation just to get to this point, because we firstly consulted to see whether we took the steps to do the thing. And I think it's in breaking it down that some of this frustration, because if we'd gone out 12 months ago to consult, we'd have been consulting on all of these things at once, and it would have just created a blooming mess, to be honest. And it wouldn't have helped any of us, because we would have got into that same cyclical conversation. So I appreciate that the passage of time has provided us with more options than were available to us 12 months ago. So I can understand respondents' frustration. I can understand respondents' concern. I can also understand my colleagues' assurance and position that, into their knowledge, it was clear, because we weren't asking people which sites would close. We weren't asking what are your concerns if your children have to walk to one or other sites. We were merely trying to get to a point where we had agreement, public agreement, to amalgamate the DFE numbers for these schools.
Thank you. And it's obvious you have got that agreement. And thanks for the clarification.
That's all right.
Thank you very much. And finally, Leanne, please.
Hi, thanks. I'm not going to press the point. I think we've all done that plenty. I too was slightly confused, having followed this for 12 months. But my point was on the consultation, and where we're talking about parish and town councillors and other vested interests. Parish and town councils have been discussed, and that's why I highlight them specifically. I understand that you have separated the consultation out to make it more, let's ask this question, receive the answer, then ask the next question, and I fully support that. But as a consultation advisor, qualified one, yes, you can go out and just send your forms and wait for people to come to you. But if you really want best practice and you really want to be taking the people on board, some of these confusions could have been dispelled by simply having maybe focus groups. I don't know if that's something you've done. If you had vested interest groups like your town councillors, who would have then been able to speak to their constituents, not just unitary, but at lower levels, with teachers, with your governing bodies, with your parents. If you'd have had those focus groups, and those people who are going to be affected the most would have been able to have heard what we've heard today, and maybe the confusion might not have been there. So that was the point I wanted to make. Thank you.
I think we'll take that on board, Councillor Buckingham. I think it's something for us to consider when we go forward. But good
Yeah,
advice.
absolutely. Thank you very much for that. And I did say finally, but Ian has just popped his hand up.
Sorry about that. I was just waiting to listen to everybody's comments. Yeah, I've listened to it. I understand concerns and everything. I haven't been a governor for nearly 14 years and a chair of governor and gone through this process. I know the impact on staff, children, and everybody locally. So I think, you know, the important thing is about in the report, it says about the amalgamation of the two schools will continue to result in children within the community and attending schools that do not provide the best possible education. That's if we don't go ahead with it. So I think ultimately out of this, children are the most important come out of it to make sure they get proper and good education. And the other thing I'd say is going forward that, you know, the officers, the council and everybody involved, keep all of the stakeholders involved on what process is going on, when it's going to happen, and obviously work well with the staff, because this is a big effect on staff as well. But I think ultimately I agree with the decision, and yeah, I'm happy to put it forward. Thank you.
Super, thank you, Ian. Okay, so if we move on to the next item, which is the school effectiveness update. Joe, it's back to you. Dorothy, Leanne and Ian, can you just pop your hands down for me, please? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm reporting this evening on a little bit of impact that the school effectiveness team have had this year, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Because this time last year I reported to the panel on the work that we were about to do in 2021-2022. I'm also going to talk to you this evening about data headlines. We do need to be aware, however, that this is at this moment in time unvalidated data, which will soon be validated. So I'm happy at a later date to give you data formally in another paper, percentages, etc. But I will be talking about those with you this evening as well. First of all, just to talk about the impact of the school effectiveness team. As you're aware, our work predominantly relates to our local authority maintained schools, and I've just given you a background in the paper as to how our team works, the officers that we have within the team and their roles, and that of course includes an associate head teacher whose role it is to be part of our team and actually work with strategic leadership in schools where appropriate, but also to support schools in a number of different ways. Sometimes, for example, if a head teacher is away from a school for a long period of time for whatever reason, then our associate head teacher can step in. So our team have got a variety of different roles, skills and skill sets that we've utilised this year. The paper goes on to talk about the type of work that we do. We give support to all of our local authority maintained schools, but as I've said in the paper, some of that support may be greater in some schools than others, and there are a variety of reasons for that, which I've captured in the report and talked about the ways in which we do support. What I would like to say is in some of our schools we do work quite intensively, and I'll talk about the impact of that, but we support our schools generally, and would like to thank the senior leaders and staff in our schools that we've worked with, because it has been a collaborative approach, and all of our schools have worked very proactively with us, and we've worked collaboratively in all occasions, whether that be in a school that we work in intensively, or a school that we're visiting on perhaps a less regular basis. But it has been a very much a collaborative approach. So we focused very much this year with our schools on the curriculum, because as I highlighted a year ago, after COVID, schools were coming out of having to deal with COVID. It had been a very challenging time for our staff, and particularly our head teachers and senior leaders. And so we've done a number of things this year to support schools to refocus back onto the curriculum. Some of that work has been universal, where we have provided curriculum training and we have invited schools to come along to that training, and that's been an invitation across our LA maintained schools as well as academies. We've also worked with our schools providing what we call subject leader surgeries. So we've worked with different subject leaders from different areas of the curriculum, and sometimes that's been on a school to school level basis, but also more broadly across. And as a result of the work that we've been doing this year, and in collaboration with our local authority maintained schools, we're pleased to share that the overall number of good and outstanding maintained primary schools in Northampton increased by 11%. So it was 78% in September and was 88% at the end of the academic year in July. Now that's as a result of the work that we've been doing with our schools, but it's also the work of the schools themselves. So those schools that were already good schools, retaining that good school status as the year has gone on and the inspections have increased. It's also important to point out that actually, as a consequence of the work that our officers in the team have done this year, again, collaboratively with our head teachers and strategic leaders and staff in our RI schools, many of those RI schools this year have converted to good. So we've captured that, of course, in this report to you. So there's just a little bit of information there around the impact that we've had this year and the work that we've been doing. Moving forward, we now have data that's come out for Northants, and I will go on to talk about that now and talk about, as a result of that data, what it is we intend to be doing this year as a school effectiveness service. So it's important to talk about this evening the fact that national data nationally this year, and the national data for the end of Key Stage 2, which is Year 6 in primary, has dropped this year. It is slightly lower, and that was to be expected as a result of COVID and the impact that that's may have had on some of our schools going forward. So the national data is lower this year. And that's in writing and maths at the end of Key Stage 2 nationally. In reading, it has gone up very, very slightly at the end of Key Stage 2, and that's the attainment data. It's also important to say that, as I said before, the drop in national figures was expected due to the impact of COVID. So in terms of Northants data, because we are a new unitary authority, we don't have anything to compare this year's data to, because we don't have data from last year. That data is, of course, based on the whole of Northamptonshire. So this is the first set of data that we've received as a unitary authority, a North unitary authority. So again, the impact of COVID has caused figures to fluctuate, but broadly the headlines are that Northants has come out just below national figures. So for example, in reading, writing and maths combined for the end of Key Stage 2, the national figure is 59%, and for North outcomes we've got 55% at reading, writing and maths combined. So if we go on to so that was reading, writing and maths combined for Northampton. So we are just below national figures. And just to say that over the measures, the gaps vary between Northants and national. Whilst it is low that it's never lower than 3% in terms of that gap between North Northants and national. So we're just below national figures. So when we look at the performance of local authority maintained schools overall, as they're the schools that we've been working with, our local authority maintained schools performed above national in reading, writing and maths combined at expected at Key Stage 2 or the end of Key Stage 2. So the progress that was made at Key Stage 2, because the results come out in terms of attainment and progress. So progress at the end of Key Stage 2 for our authority maintained schools is slightly below national in terms of progress in reading, but is significantly above national in terms of progress in writing and in maths at the end of Key Stage 2. But we realise that there is work to be done in terms of the data across our North schools. But I would say that it's important to note that when our school effectiveness team work with schools, data will be considered as part of a triangulation with other information, such as inspection outcomes, the quality of leadership and management, the quality of the curriculum delivery. Assessment will be part of that, and other broader information such as attendance of pupils and groups of pupils, suspensions and exclusions, and progress made by SEND pupils. So it will be considered as part of a bigger picture and not necessarily treated in isolation. And most importantly, the direction of travel over time for our maintained schools will form part of that triangulation process. So moving on, we also report statutorily on the data at the end of early years, and that is called a good level of development. And nationally, the good level of development was 65.77%, and for North Northants that was slightly lower than national at 62.1%. So what I'll talk to you about the work that we're going to do around that in a moment. And we also report on the phonics outcomes for Year 1 pupils. So nationally, the phonics outcomes were 75%, and in North Northants, we've got 71.6. So I'll be talking to you about the work we're going to do around phonics. But it is important to remember that at this moment in time, this is unvalidated data. If we look at the locality level then of the work that we're going to be doing moving forward, apologies, I wanted to report on the local authority maintained schools. So in terms of the data for a good level of development, in terms of our local authority maintained schools, they were broadly in line with national for a good level of development, and with phonics, Year 1 phonics, our local authority maintained schools were broadly in line with national as well. So the work that we'll be doing moving forward with our schools we want to work on a locality level. We will obviously be able to look at data together with our localities of schools. We will be meeting with our heads in our locality head teacher meetings in the autumn, and it's an ideal opportunity to share the data with our head teachers as we move forward. At a broader school level, we've already started work in some key areas. So for example, we recognise that reading and phonics is an area that we would like to do some more work on. And with that in mind, we are considering that, for example, the children transitioning from the end of Key Stage 2 into their secondary schools, as a result of the data that I just shared with you this evening, we want to look more closely at that transition process. So we have started a piece of work on transition between schools from primary through to secondary, and that is based upon phonics and reading. So we've started that piece of transition work. We've started it on a smaller scale. But what we would like to do is, once we've completed that piece of work, is in conversation with our wider schools, both LA maintained and academies, look at the outcome of that project and then look at whether we can move forward with that on a larger scale with our schools as we move through this academic year. We've also begun looking at writing, because we recognise that writing attainment data in the north is another area that we're looking at the moment. And so there's a writing workshop that's going to be run this term with our schools. So we've already started work on some of those key areas where the data is showing that there are improvements to be made. We're also wanting to talk collaboratively with our school leaders across both academies and LA maintained schools about this data, and we want to be able to share it in greater detail with our schools and look at ways in which we can work more collaboratively together to understand from our leaders in those schools what they believe the barriers are and how we can work together to resolve that. And also we want to look at good practice across Northants and to find out where we can signpost schools to one another in order to be able to address some of these issues. But again, I would say it's really important not necessarily to treat the data in isolation, but to treat it alongside all the other information that we have about a school and make sure that we're working closely with the school as a whole and the leaders in those schools to understand where we go to next. So we can work with the data on a locality level, and we'll do that in each of our localities as we move forward with our head teacher locality meetings. We also want to work on a broader school level, and I've talked about the work that we're starting with some of our schools at the moment, and we want to continue through this academic year to develop. And I also want to be able to share with you some of the things that we will be doing moving forward, some other work that we'll be doing, because we are also looking to work with schools around our pupil premium and disadvantaged pupils. And we have a project that started in September, where we're going to be working with schools together, both academies and LA maintained schools, to create a Northants strategy around disadvantaged pupils. Again, it will involve working with schools, going into schools, a co-production approach to the strategy, and looking at the barriers that our schools face and looking at good practice and working together to resolve some of those issues and to come up with a strategy that helps all of our schools to use good practice in order to move forward with that particular focus. So future work will be to co-produce and plan school improvement activities and priorities with all schools, building a collaborative approach, looking at a solution-focused approach as we move forward, working in collaboration with maintained schools and academies to improve outcomes for all pupils across Northants, identifying good practice, and if necessary, working in locality areas to do that. To continue to focus on and improve the quality of education. I've talked tonight about that being around the curriculum, but we also are going to be focusing on reading and phonics and also writing as we move forward. Focusing on reducing the gap for disadvantaged pupils and continuing to develop effective transition between schools and settings. And again, we talked about that transition between primary and secondary around reading and phonics, and we've already started a piece of work on that. At an individual school level, members of my team will still continue to work with individual schools on a broad range of areas. And as I said, data will be factored into those conversations, but it is important that that is treated with caution this year, because it is our first, not only our first set of data for Northants, but also a first set of data for our schools following COVID. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo, and very comprehensive and a lot of figures within that report. And I'm sure you said at the beginning that you're going to forward a report on to us with all those figures listed and everything. You did say that, didn't you?
Yes, as soon as the data is validated. I'm very happy to do that. I'm very happy to come back and talk again about that if that is something that is required.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Joe. So we've got Philip.
Thank you, Joe. That's all very, very reassuring, the work that's continuing to go on. I do have a few questions. First of all, as regards data, I totally appreciate you've got to, figures can be very misleading without a local context. But if you are sending us on some data, could I ask that it show the progress all the same since 2019? I appreciate it was a different authority in charge since 2019, but that's how the government is showing students' progress. And it's good to know that our children are, well, just below the national level, but it would perhaps be more useful to know, have they made the same amount of progress as children nationally, or less progress, or more progress? That's actually much more important than just the figures. So if you can send us such figures, that would be great. I'm a bit confused about validation, because certainly whenever I've dealt with stats data, we've just, I mean, occasionally you might appeal one, but that's really quite rare. Really, the SATS data is valid straight away, but maybe there's something I'm not understanding about that. Certainly all the government data is already out there to look at the national picture. So if you are able to send us out, even if it's unvalidated, I think personally I would like to see it sooner rather than later. Certainly as a school leader, the moment SATs have been finished, I've been required to give to governors or trustees a very detailed breakdown of reading, writing, maths percentages, what percentage it was last year, what the progress was, what I'm going to do about it. So I think even more so for the North Northamptonshire maintained schools, it would be really useful for us as an EAP to be totally armed with that data so that we could delve into it a bit more and understand why you're prioritising what you're prioritising. I don't question your judgment on that at all. I'm quite sure you're focusing help where it's most needed. The other point is just about data. You mentioned very pleasingly that we're now on 88% good or outstanding schools. But if I'm right in thinking that there's less than 40 schools that we have responsibility for, so I guess we're talking about 2 more schools have moved into away from requiring improvement. Would that be right? But that is good. And my next question then is, do you anticipate any of these schools on level 2 to get to level 1 outstanding this year?
Very good questions, Philip. I could answer that. It is 2 primary schools, isn't it, Joe, that have moved from requires improvement to good, isn't it?
So I can report at the moment on the fact that we have 50% of our RI schools that have moved to good. So we had 8 of those at the beginning of the year. So we've had 4 that have been inspected.
So 4 have moved from RI to good.
Yes, but some of those haven't yet been inspected. So there are more inspections, obviously, that will go ahead this year.
Okay, perfect. Is that the Philip? Was there any more?
Yes. So another question was, can we have, even if data is unvalidated, as I say, I'm not quite clear what that means, could we please still have the data issued to us anyway?
Of course.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Philip and Joe. Dorothy.
Sorry, my question is, could we have the data for each year group? So where you've got year 6, I take it, that's what you've been giving us. But could we have it from reception up to year 6 so that we could see how good each year is actually doing?
So in terms of the data, there are statutory data points. So the end of reception is one statutory data point, and the end of key stage 2 is also a statutory data point. We can also report on end of key stage 1 outcomes, which is year 2, but we don't necessarily have that information there. But there are no tests for the intervening year.
I realise that.
We wouldn't necessarily have that big picture data. Schools may keep their own information about the performance of those year groups, but actually in terms of the data that we look at, it would be the statutory end data.
So when it comes to key stage 1, you wouldn't necessarily have that data because there's no there is assessments made of key stage 1, but that's not necessarily printed, is it? That's what you're saying.
So it's the data that comes at the end of key stage 2.
Yeah.
And also at the end of reception, which is what we call a good level of development.
Okay. Right. And do we know if any schools, one more question, do we know of any schools, of maintained schools now, which are clearly falling behind? I mean, I wouldn't say, are there some schools that are struggling since COVID?
Sorry, since
COVID.
I think it would be fair to say that a number of our schools broadly across Northampton have struggled as a result of COVID, but moving forward, certainly I think schools are in a better place now than they have been previously because they've been dealing with COVID. So there is a positive move forward in that respect.
My concern is, personally, is that I'm hearing that some schools are struggling financially to make the books meet or make the ends meet, and therefore, instead of using qualified teachers, are using TAs to take classes. Have you found that yourself?
I'm not sure this is part of school effectiveness.
No, but I was just wondering, that was all.
Yeah, no, I think we'll come back to you offline with an answer to that one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for that, Jo. So we move on to number 6, which is the update on educational psychologist service. It does say Nicola Jones on your agenda. She's on annual leave this week, so Neil's going to present this one.
Thank you, Chair. I hope Ben is going to, oh, look at that. Okay, so we've got a very short presentation. As Councillor Edwards has said, Nicola is on leave, so I'm going to go through this and hopefully it will give you the brief update that we're promised, but of course happy to come back at a later meeting if you'd like a more detailed overview, and Nicola can come back and answer more detailed questions about the work of the Education Psychology Service. I thought it would be helpful to start with to set out the establishment of the EPS service as it currently stands. So what you've got in front of you is those EPs in post and the vacancies that we're currently looking to fill. So obviously you have a principal EP, so the lead education psychologist, and then you have the figures which are all full-time equivalents, sometimes filled by more than one post as we go through the rest of the team. And you'll see we've got some interim arrangements in to fill the vacancies that are identified at the bottom, and what are called associate EPs, which are EPs we contract to work with us to support the service to meet vacancies as well. What you also see that as we have been successful in starting with the recruitment process under the vacancy, so we have made some appointments. They take some time to come in. Either they work on a termly basis, hence the January 2023 date, or we're appointing successful trainees who would come in obviously next September, and once again, hence the 1st of September 2023 as well. So that's the group and the cohort from which we're recruiting. So what you'll see overall is that the EPS service is broadly staffed with vacancies covered either through associates acting up or the use of trainees in supporting the EAP work, and that the work to recruit to the vacancies is ongoing. We can go to the next slide, please, Ben. Thank you very much. So in terms of the work of the EPs, one of the key areas that they undertake is advices around education, health and care plan assessments. And what we thought we'd show is the progress over time of our success in completing those within the time limit, which is in 60 days of the start. So as you can see, year on year we've improved, and in 2021-22 there's been a significant improvement in the timeliness of our advices. That's been a key focus for us. The education psychology team have focused on this really specifically because this has a real direct impact on the time it takes the family to go through the EHCP process. We're still not where we want to be. There's still more work to do, and the next slide will show a bit more about that. This has been achieved, however, at the reduction and some of the traded work that they've been able to offer to schools. So outside of the statutory work that's identified here, the EPs trade with schools, and they continue to do so, but that has been, the ability to do so is limited somewhat by the focus that's been put on this piece of work. If we go on to the next slide, Ben. Thank you. So this shows progress over the year in terms of the delivery of the education psychology advices on time. You'll see the month on month it changes, as you imagine. That's to do with it obviously reduces in the summer holidays, as you know, it's not possible to work with schools in quite the same way and those other things, but overall the level is being maintained at around the 75%, which was the average that was shown for last last academic year. But our target is to get to 95%, so we've got some distance to go. Now, clearly part of that is around finishing the recruitment process and getting an established team in place, but also there's work to be done around ensuring we're working as effectively and efficiently as possible with schools and with the EHCP team to deliver the advices on time and support the work. So, like I say, significant and ongoing and sustained improvement over time, but still more work to do. And as you'll see, this is our monitoring sheets that we look at every month, and you'll see this is described as underperforming, and that's because our target is to get to 95%, which is obviously a really high proportion, and something we're aspiring to get to. If we can move on again, Ben, thank you. Okay. So some work was done in June and July 22, surveying our schools to see how effectively they thought the education psychology team were supporting them in various aspects of their work. And what you've got here is the outcomes. And I think it's fair to say that that was a positive experience. There was positive feedback from most schools. The issues being around, if we look at the responding quickly to phone calls or emails at the bottom, capacity and those sorts of things. But clearly, when they get working with the education psychology, and the really key one, which is relates and works well with our children, 97%, agree that the education psychologists are doing that really effectively. I think the work they're doing is really, really good, and that's really encouraging to see and something we want to move on with. Clearly, this is something we'll do again, so we'll be able to see any trajectory in terms of the support that schools feel they're getting over time, and we monitor and manage that with them. The Education Psychology Service are taking this, and there's much more detail behind this that I haven't shared, and are looking at how they can adjust how they operate to ensure they are best supporting schools. We can move on another one, please, Ben. In terms of other work that the EPS service do, I just thought I'd give you some information on the training they do. And one of those is called TAMS, which is the Targeted Mental Health in Schools scheme, which is training for school staff to support them in supporting pupils within their schools. And this is a really key piece of work, and you've got a bit of a history of it here as to how it came about, and it started off being a national scheme, and we've embedded that within the work we do with our schools. But I think this is effective and well received within schools, and enables support to be offered around the broader sweep of mental health issues within pupils prior to engagement with TAMS. And obviously this mentions any movement that might move to CAMS, the higher level health related mental health services as well. So this supports our graduated response, supports schools acting early, and supporting pupils at the very first identification of need. We move on one more, Ben. Thank you. This is just a summary of the other training and courses that the service offers. So I thought it'd be useful to see what they get involved in, which is everything from anxiety to Lego-based therapy to restorative approaches. And as you can see, a lot of these courses are really well taken up. There's a lot of demand for them, and that schools really appreciate the work that the EPS service are doing with them to bring this training to them. Clearly, we review this year on year to ensure it's still appropriate and meets schools' needs, and we'll do so again in the following years. Thank you, Ben. So, like I say, today this was just an update and an overview of where the EPS service are. I hope that's been helpful to give you the key figures and a position of where we are and give you a picture of what the EPS service is doing. Like I say, Nicola would be very happy to come to a future meeting to answer any more in-depth questions about the EPS service and how they work, but I'm sure Anne-Marie and myself could answer questions about the presentation and any other, and take away any that we can't answer.
Thank you very much for that, Neil. So I've got Wendy, please.
Thank you. That was a very quick whiz through. Can I just make a plea? Could we please have any papers before the meeting so that we can actually read through? Although that was helpful to go through that, but it would be useful to be able to read anything beforehand. It was good to see the year-on-year improvement to that anybody that pupils are seen, young people are seen within the timescale. Those that I noticed the 90 at the moment we're up to 93% seen with 4 weeks late, within 4 weeks late. Are that extra 7%, are they being seen, or do they drop? Are you confident that they are seen, the extra 7% that aren't seen within 4 weeks, the 4 week later than the allocated timescales?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Councillor. And apologies for not circulating the paper beforehand. That was entirely my fault. A mix up between myself and Nicola. It should have gone out, and we absolutely aim to do that. Of course we do. So where the figure that we're looking at, the 93% or the 73%, is the advice is completed. So the children are being seen before that. It's just the advice isn't complete, and that can be for lots of reasons. So it could be the child's unwell or gone away, or the educational psychologist himself is unwell. There's lots of reasons that can come into this, or the family, for whatever reason, aren't engaging at this point in time. So there are lots of reasons, but what I can say is I'm confident the child is being seen and being supported in school. It's just the advice isn't complete, which then enables the EHCP to be completed, which is clearly really key for us to get the support wrapped around that child. So like I said, I think we can be confident that support is being given. We're just not able to complete that for reasons that are many and complex. Thank you. And then just one last question. I know the education psychologist service, they'll see children with a broad spectrum of issues. Something I'm particularly interested in is dyslexia. And I believe if children aren't seen early enough, then it can really have an impact on their education, because they don't believe they've got the ability when actually they're struggling with a specific area, and given the right tools to learn, that the learning then becomes easier. I didn't see anything with the courses down there about dyslexia. Is the service seeing many children with dyslexia, or do they all through the net? No, I think that's I think of your question again. I think that's a broader answer to that, because dyslexia would be something that we would collaborate with our health colleagues on as well, and particularly with our school colleagues, because exactly as you've said, the key with dyslexia and those sorts of concerns is to pick them up as early as possible. So I think with our health colleagues, we work with schools to help them identify what might be potential dyslexia or other cognitive issues that might fall into the same category at the same time. I don't think the EP service would do specific work on that other than within the EHCP category. I think training would probably come through a health source, but I'd be happy to ask the question for you. But like I said, I am happy that they are engaging with health and absolutely encounter those issues and identify them and support them through the EHCP process. Thank you.
Thank you. Leanne.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm right in saying that this data is just Northants specific, not across the county. Yep, I'm seeing nods, that's fine, we'll leave that there. When you were looking at staff, so interesting, we've spoke about staff quite a lot and how many educational psychologists we've got in the county. I saw there was quite a few vacancies, and there was more than I thought there would have been, as in the overall we're looking to have is bigger than I thought it would have been. But I think I only saw one assistant. Is that an administrative role that supports all of the educational psychologists, or is it somebody who's training towards? And I ask that because obviously we want the expertise from the educational psychologist to be seeing people as much as we can. And is there an opportunity whilst we're looking at the service to make sure that the administrative function is done by the right person as opposed to a psychologist that could possibly be doing more referrals per se?
Thank you for your question, Councillor. Yeah, no, a psychology assistant isn't an administrative role. There are administrators that support the team outside of this and do things like, you know, diary management and a whole raft of really, really important stuff, as you can imagine. Absolutely. The psychology assistant is an unqualified post. And as you say, that person might choose to move into a trainee psychology post or not, but they bring a different set of skills into the team and are really valuable within the team, but do a different role than the psychologists themselves.
Thank you. And Dorothy.
Well, my first question is, how many children this year are actually needing to be assessed by an education psychologist? That's the first question.
Oh, I don't have that figure on the top of my head, but I could certainly go and find that out. If Nicola was here, I'm sure she could respond to that. So apologies. Like I said, I'm filling in a bit.
I'd be quite interested in that if that could be given to me. How many children from last year still haven't been assessed? That's the next question.
So that can, do you mean, it depends what you mean by assessed. Do you
Yes,
mean, do you mean advice is given or assessed?
No, they're assessed. They're assessed for maybe their behaviour or maybe for other aspects of psychology which they need help for. How many from last year have not been assessed?
Well, as I say, I think my view would be that all of the children will have been seen by an education psychologist if you understand that as being assessed. If I'm answering a question appropriately, that doesn't mean advices will have been completed for reasons that I've gone into previously. There are reasons why some of those haven't been completed. They should all have been seen or at least contacted with a view to being seen. I don't think there are outstanding issues where we haven't been in contact at all, if that's your question.
Well, my question is that without the assessment, the school doesn't get the funding in order to employ somebody to come in and work with that particular child. And so therefore, if they don't get assessed, that drags on. There are some children who still haven't been assessed from last year, and therefore the funding from last year was met by the schools. And given the fact that they have a shortage of budget at the moment, that makes it quite difficult. So the question is, are we actually making sure that we're up to date for this year in assessing children to make sure the schools get the funding to help those individual children who need help? So
that's you've hit the nail on the head, Councillor Maxwell. That's the very reason why we focus so much on advices on time. That's why we want to be at 95%, which accepts that some will always go over for reasons that are unavoidable. So if we're at about 75% on average, then 75% of those advices are going out within the time scale. And as you saw on the slide, 95%, 93% are going out 4 weeks late. And like I say, there will always be some for reasons that are unavoidable that go beyond that. So that once the advice is given and the HCP is completed, then the money will flow to the school. Prior to that, we do have the opportunity for schools to work with us on early help funding, which is a different issue and probably not for tonight, but just to be reassured, there is something that comes before this, and in our attempts to ensure there is a graduated response to need, you know, support within school, support that we provide to school, and then the HCPs beyond that. So hopefully schools feel that there is the opportunity to access support at whatever level they're at, even prior to any HCP.
And lastly, how many actual qualified psychologists have we got working in North Northants Council?
I think that was on the slide, Dorothy, actually.
I can add that up off the slide.
Yes, yeah.
Is it? Well, I haven't got the paperwork, so I wouldn't know.
We're going to forward these slides out to you immediately after this, Dorothy, so you'll
Very
have
good.
up-to-date information.
On a calculation, looking at the slide, slightly over 14 on a full-time equivalent basis.
Thank you very much for that, Neil. So we move on to item 6, which is the item 7, which is the forward list of executive items. Ben?
Sorry, I've got so many screens running. I'm to find the right one. Okay, so this is the executive forward plan from 1st of November to 28th of February. There are a few items from Children's Services on that forward plan. There is an item on Children's Social Care Case Management System going to the executive on the 10th of November. I don't know if you wanted to say a few words on that, Anne-Marie.
I think we already. No, I'm getting my meetings mixed up. Yeah, that is a replacement case management system for the Children's Trust. So it's the database that social workers record their work on, but we can discuss that subsequently. That's going through the procurement process at this stage.
Yeah, so more a technical report.
Yeah, I mean, it's technical around procurement and timescales.
Yeah. So we've also got Tennyson Road and Alfred Street, which we've just discussed, on the 10th of November. Then going into December, 22nd of December, we have disaggregation of the Joint Sensory Impairment Service. I don't know if that's an item that may be appropriate to come to this EAP.
Yeah, I think it would be, Ben, and I think you probably also want to add in December the Ofsted report, because that will be published on the 25th of November. So we might want to have a discussion on that there as well.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's it for the items on the executive forward plan.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ben. And a forward list of executive items.
So moving on to our internal forward plan, we have going into the next meeting, 22nd of November, we did have to push back the briefing on school admissions and appeals process due to leave and it being half term. So Jan Baines will be bringing that report to you in the next meeting. We've also got update on early childhood provision and the virtual school head annual report. And so in December, we will then add the Ofsted report and also the joint sensory report that we've just discussed. So I don't know if there's any further reports that you would like to see.
Ben, I'm going to give an update from the last week's SEND peer review as any other business item today, which is a brief PowerPoint, but I'm expecting to receive a more full report from the peer reviewers. And I would tentatively put that on November. Hopefully we've got it in time for circulation then, and if not, if if members would be happy that we take that into December if I don't get the report from the peer reviewers, because I don't have a finalised timescale around that. But I think it would be of benefit to read through the fuller detail from that I'm about to discuss as in any other business.
Thank you very much.
Superb. Thank you very much for that. Which moves us on to, it's not on the agenda, but we, as Anne-Marie has alluded to, we had a peer review of the SEND provision last week. So Anne-Marie is going to give us a brief presentation of the outcome of that peer review.
Okay. Have you got the presentation in front of you?
Thanks, Ben. I don't recognise that first slide. But if you could move on, maybe I'll.
Oh, sorry. Is this the correct presentation?
No, I think that's the wrong one. Let me see if I've potentially sent you the wrong one. What's the next slide? Sorry, Ben. No, this is not the one that we want. This is what went to the reviewers. Let me see if I can find it.
Dorothy, just pop your hand down for me, please. Thank you. Unless you're very eager.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go in about 10 minutes, so I'd like to get the slides from this if possible. Thanks.
Absolutely, and we'll forward them on to you as well if you have to leave. Although we'll forward them on anyway.
Ben, I'm just sending it to you now.
Yep, thank you.
So I'll make a start then, if that's all right, while Ben's pulling the slides up. So you didn't receive these papers in advance because we had a peer review on Thursday and Friday last week on SEN. The challenge that we set to the peer reviewers was to assess us against our co-production, which those of you who are closer to the SEN world will appreciate that co-production needs to be at the heart of everything that we do on SEN. So we wanted to test ourselves really on that and take the views of independence. So the peer reviewers were made up from a regional team of SEND experts as part of our regional sector-led improvement programme. Through the course of the 2 days, the peer reviewers saw, we can see it on there, perfectly timed, Ben, they saw 90 people over the course of 2 days. So it was a very busy 2 days. That included children and young people. In fact, the children and young people weren't included in the 90. So the 90 people included parents and carers and a range of professionals over 2 days. And then they also saw children and young people outside of that 90. Next slide, Ben, thanks. There were a number of strengths that were picked out, which was great, actually, and quite a relief. And again, there's a lot of information in here, so I'm just going to pick up on some of the key points there. So they could see a growing understanding of personalisation and collaboration. So good news that we're not just doing this ourselves and working unilaterally, but we are working with the right partners. Comment there really from parents who are talking about schools, and they're saying that some schools across North Northants deliver a gold standard around inclusion, but other schools, which we have alluded to today and other times, aren't quite as inclusive and aren't as accommodating as some of our children and young people with additional needs as we wouldn't want them to be. The education, health and care plans, again, issued in 2022, they're seeing some improvement there. And the penultimate point on that slide is timeliness about education, health and care plans, which again, Dorothy, I think is what you were alluding to and that Neil has mentioned. Educational psychologists form one part of that. We are performing significantly above the national average. Now, that's not my words, that's the words of the peer reviewers. And for members to understand, we're performing just over 60%, I think, of our education, health and care plans are on time. Now, I'm not saying that that's all right, because we're still pushing to be in excess of 85%, but it will probably horrify you to hear that the national average of education, health and care plans that are produced on time is now in the region of 20%. So we are performing 3 times higher in North Northants than the national average. That's despite some of the challenges that we have. Next slide, Ben, please. Areas for development. Obviously, there's a backlog of older education and health and care plans, and some independent moderation and quality assurance. So they're areas of development. In terms of the backlog, there are multiple and varied reasons why we have a backlog of education, health and care plans. Some of those are actually the difficulty in finding a suitable school placement. Sometimes it is because parents don't agree to the placement that's been agreed, or that schools are simply not agreeing to take some of those children and young people. So we appreciate that sometimes with the backlog, it's about the system working to provide provision for our children, not necessarily the teams that aren't performing, but it's good to ask the question. Not all schools are person-centred, and again, that comes out in some of the education, health and care plans that are difficult in placing children, because some schools just refuse to take some of our children, which is always going to be a challenge to us. The recommendation for further action from our regional colleagues were whether they could join up with us and do some moderation of the quality of our education, health and care plans, which will be well received, and it's something that we're going to say yes to. And also to do some work with our schools and our SENCOs in particular around a person-centred approach to delivering schooling services for our children. Thanks, Ben. In terms of co-production, again, there are many strengths, and again, these are going to be circulated. So one of the key challenges that we've had this year is around parent care forum. So we have to, there are statutory consultee for the work that we do. They're by no means the only parent carer group that we work with, but we should be consulting with those. The challenge that we've had in North Northants is in the entirety of our parent carer forum were parents and carers from West Northants. So where we're under pressure from the Department for Education to have our own parent carer forum, we would, at the beginning of this year, we would have had a parent carer forum with a membership of 0. So in the background, we're doing a lot of work with the parent carer forum to broaden the membership. We're doing some work with schools. We've been running a couple of series of workshops and engagement events, and we're running in the autumn, or Nicola is running in the autumn, some meet the teams events so that parents and carers can come and see what we're all about. We did have some parent carers who are resident and have children in North Northants schools who are starting to join us, and we're hoping that we can build a critical mass. So my ask of members would be, if you have got parents and carers in your constituencies, and your colleagues have within their constituencies, who you think would like to engage and would help to assist on our improvement journey and be a critical friend to the work that we're doing, then we would desperately love to hear from them. And that's where you could really add value in assisting us in growing our own parent carer forum. So as soon as we can split from the parent carer forum in West Northants, because the approach we're taking and indeed our levels of performance are unrecognisable from our former colleagues in the West. And therefore it's really difficult when we're relying on a parent carer forum who are used to the practice and the performance levels in the West, when they want to practice in a different and a certainly improved way in North Northants. Next slide, Ben, thanks. Recommendations there about a locality data dashboard, which we are producing, and a scorecard that we share with schools so that schools can see how inclusive they are, which will explode some of the myths. And a co-production charter, which we have in development at the minute. And again, if you've got parents, carers, professionals that would want to get involved in that, then let us know, because the more we can engage more voices, the better. And there was also an offer then from the region that Derby have been working with the University of Derby to develop a young researchers group, and they have offered us the services of that young researchers group to test some of the work that we're doing again, which we'll take on that offer, and hopefully in time we'll also grow our own young researchers. Thanks, Ben. Strategic co-production, I mean, they're just words that look a little bit like gobbledygook really in there, but I'm sure when you go through the detail and when you get the report, you'll see more detail. But in terms of our strategic approach, we do have, and I've been chairing, it's something, one of the first things I set up when I started here is AD for Education strategic group, which is the SEND Accountability Board, which brings a number of partners together. And some of the developments in there is the data dashboard in there, and also the joint ownership of the SEND agenda, if you like, and Councillor Edwards to sit on that SEND Accountability Board. Next step, slide. Not next step, that's coming. Areas for development, and there's a nod there to our colleagues in public health around our joint strategic needs assessment, and also colleagues in health around joint commissioning. So there's some big strategic challenges there that we need to get across. And then a co-production action plan. So we've got a number of work streams as part of the SEND Accountability Board, but that's not pulled together at this stage in a single action plan. It'll be an action plan that sits underneath our self-assessment. So we do need a self-assessment or a self-evaluation, which is the set on there. And we'll need that for when Ofsted, our friends at Ofsted come and visit at any time from the spring forward to look at our work on SEND. And the offer again there is that we pair with one of the authorities who are perceived to be doing well on SEND and use some of their capacity and professional challenge to make sure that we're in the best place that we can be. Thanks, Ben. So, there you go, look. We're going to have a fuller report on all of this detail by the 4th of November, so we will be able to share that in November, assuming we agree with what comes through. And then we will take any support that's brokered by the region. But that was the feedback to us on Friday afternoon, so it is hot off the press. Happy to, you may or may not, you can put it down, Ben, if you want. You may or may not have questions now, but I'm happy that when you've considered it, we either answer the questions remotely, or you can save them up as a special treat for me, and we can answer them all in November. But I'm happy to do either.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, and I participated last Thursday and Friday, and I have to say it was, a very worthwhile experience, and I think we've got a really lot of positive comments moving forward. There is still work to be done, but we knew that anyway. But it is positive to get the feedback that we did moving forward, and a lot of hard work from a lot of our officers have gone into this. So it's good to see on reflection that outside bodies and authorities recognise that as well. I've got Leanne with her hand up.
Just a super quick one. Percentages are great when we're comparing, but can we, where possible, include some actual figures so we know what that looks like in detail? Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Superb, thank you. And as Anne-Marie has said, she's quite happy to take any questions once you've digested when the report comes to you offline, or indeed wait until the next EAP. So that's superb. So that brings us to item 9, which is the close of meeting. So thank you very much for your attendance tonight. And I close this meeting at 18:51. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman.
Bye.
Thank you, Chair.